Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Chicago-based jazz musician, educator, and visual artist Damon Locks. We had a good talk about his life as an artist, musician, and educator, and his new 2021 CD called Now with the Black Monument Ensemble. The album was created in the final throes of summer 2020, following months of pandemic-induced fear and isolation. He is originally from Silver Springs, Maryland, and has been known for decades with various projects in Chicago's underground music and art scenes. It's a great story. Enjoy.
Thanks again for taking a minute out for the show, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, of course.
So, the one thing that's going on right now with artists that are releasing material, there's been this big chasm. There's been this long time away from live music. Releasing an album right now, your new album, and it's getting reviewed really well. I just saw a post about Wired put it in as one of the top albums of the year. Overall, how does it feel to have an album out now with the possibility of live shows and just kind of getting out of COVID, so to speak?
It's kind of like we're just seeing what happens, We actually played in Utrecht and London, and, we're in a world full of unknowns. Let's see what possibilities are, where we are, because it could change, I think that's where I am. It's kind of trying to see what you can make happen within the window of time of possibility. I'm not sure if things will get better or worse. While we have the opportunity, we're going to make something of it.
So talk to me a little bit about this album specifically, what you're hoping the listener gets from it.
The album was made, over during the lockdown when it was we really didn't know what was going to happen or what was safe and what was not safe. And I really felt the need for Black Monument to say something from that vantage point, There was a lot of uprise happening because of the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. Via social media, I could see that people were turning to the first album a lot for reasons, because the lyrics were apropos to the moment, And so there was an urge for me to have a current statement from Black Monument Ensemble, like what would Black Monument say in this situation, because the material that people were reaching to was from 2018. I wrote in 2018 or 2017, And so, we had to go into a backyard of a studio where we recorded outside the preliminary tracks for that record, just for safety, because we just didn't know, I feel like we captured that moment. We captured a moment of insecurity, but also a moment of community and gathering and potential. And I hope that moment translates to moments for the listener. We had cicadas, we had worry, we had masks, we had all of these things, and we were also celebratory and convening with each other, to make something. So I hope that is what translates to the listener.
When I think about what's going on with art these days and the way the world, this is pretty magnanimous what we've dealt with over the last year and a half on the planet, and lots of things have happened within this bubble, like George Floyd and all these things that no one expected. So my question to you is, how vital do you see it for artists to have a voice and to have a very powerful voice during this time to kind of give people some hope as we go through some pretty polarizing times in this country?
Well, it's interesting. Pre-pandemic, I have a good friend that I used to, I regularly go to the comic book store with. And he would play that game about, who would you need for your, apocalyptic team? What people would you pick to be on your team for the apocalypse, right? And he would say, it's unfortunate that, art isn't really going to help during the apocalypse. I need a farmer. I need someone, someone who knows how to build things, Art isn't really going to play a role. But this pandemic, this virus, this moment when worldwide people needed to lock down and stay home and stop was like the closest thing to kind of an apocalypse that we've seen, you know? And the first thing people did is they turned to art. They turned to, you know, their computers and looked for people dancing and people singing and making things, you know? That to me was a evidence that art is a way that people, you know, turn to help them envision possibilities. So I think art is crucial when things are challenging and desperate and strange. That's when we need art most to imagine what the future could be like.
Wow, what a farce to even think that, you know, a game would even pretend to think that artists wouldn't have a vital role. I mean, if we didn't have the art, the blight that would have happened on this planet would have been unbelievable. And that was the thing that I kept thinking, is I was really interviewing musicians after March of 2020. It's like, you heard about all the frontline workers, you heard about the grocery store and the healthcare and all of that. I get all of that. But I kept talking to musicians about the fact that, you know what, you all are the frontline people, you know. And I think the interesting thing now is we start coming kind of out of this, or we've been in this long enough. I think one of the COVID silver linings is going to be the woodshedding, the creativity that happened while we were all waiting to get back to a live environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there should be probably a deluge of material coming out in response. And I know I spoke to a lot of friends that were artists, and for a lot of people that first period of lockdown was really, really hard to overcome in terms of like a creative, like a stumbling block, you know? And I think it was that many artists, like, you know, have a perspective in which they speak from, you know, in a world that was like, you know, lacked perspective, that was like a abstract kaleidoscope of things happening. It was hard to gain perspective. So having some time to really situate yourself as artists, now that we have, there should be a lot of material coming out reflecting on this whole season, you know?
Absolutely. So, you know, being such a reflective time, what did you learn about yourself over this time that maybe you didn't realize before that's going to make you stronger as you reemerge and promote new material and play live shows?
Well, I think, I mean, we already hit on it. I mean, for me, I had to like just barrel through that stumbling block of creation, right? Like, I knew that if, like, the best way for me to survive this was to make art. And so I had to like create situations where I had to make work within that context so that I could like have some hope and have something to reach for, you know, and create something for others to reach for. It was my saving grace, you know, to be able to create work, whether it's visual work or you know, musical work or what have you. That was my saving grace. And it's really great when something that you've been doing, like drawing, since you were in third grade, can really help you survive a pandemic.
Yeah. So are you originally from Chicago?
I'm originally from Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside Washington, D.C.
Okay. Well, talk to me a little bit about your childhood and how, you know, music and more specifically jazz became your life.
Well, that happened, you know, once I got to Chicago. I mean, I was deeply involved as a child in the like DC music scene. In the early '80s, there was you know, Minor Threat and Scream and Boyd and Bad Brains and like this vital, you know, underground punk hardcore scene that introduced me to a world of possibilities that I didn't know about. And it wasn't until I came to school in Chicago where like I kind of extended that and played music in a punk band called Trenchmouth. After, you know, maybe a decade of being in Chicago playing music, I started to find that there were all these jazz musicians that were like popping up in the kind of, for lack of a better term, the alternative scene, right? And so I found that there was a whole kind of parallel jazz world happening in Chicago, and I got really intrigued with it. I had formed a band called the Eternals, and we played a lot, and we started playing with this group called Isotope 217 that was on Thrill Jockey, and that led me to get to know this musician, Rob Mazurek. After Isotope 217, one of the groups that Rob formed was called the Exploding Star Orchestra, and he really liked what I did in the Eternals and said, hey, can you do this recitation with Exploding Star Orchestra? So I did that in the studio for the first time, and then he said, hey, I hope you don't mind, you're in the Exploding Star Orchestra now. And I said, okay. And so it was a really amazing, training ground, because I was doing vocals in a jazz orchestra that had lots of room for improvisation. So it was trial by fire, because Rob thought of vocals as, the same as any other instrument. So he might point to a saxophone player and say, do a solo, point to the drummer and do a solo, then would point to me and be like, okay, go. And I was like, but you don't understand. I have to say words. I have to have some melody. I have to, it has to seem like something. But he didn't seem to care, so I had to figure out how to do that. And so that was a learning experience, and it still is, because I still work with Rob. But it was a learning experience on how to deal with improvisation, how to write music in different ways than I had in my punk bands. And then how do you maintain and develop a large ensemble? So that was really my musical training to prepare me for Black Monument Ensemble, But at the same time as all these things were happening, of course, I was growing and buying records and listening to a lot more stuff than my, punk upbringing.
So when you got to Chicago, you said things kind of started coming to life for you creatively, artistically. What was the first live show you saw in Chicago that made you think, man, that's something I would love to do?
To be perfectly honest, I've been seeing live shows since I was a teenager, It was those early shows of seeing Bad Brains and Minor Threat and things like that were the things that were like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. But there was definitely a wave that happened in the late 80s, early 90s. I saw the Sun Ra Orchestra, and that blew my mind. There was a band from the Netherlands called Dogface Hermans that were really incredible. A band from D.C. called two bands from D.C. that made a huge impression, Fugazi and Nation of Ulysses. These were just experiences, and countless others from Circus Lupus and Jawbox and lots of other groups that really just lit the fire of performance for me. But definitely Sun Ra and his orchestra was unlike anything I'd ever seen before.
You have a life of being a visual artist, a musician, an educator. How do all of these ids come together for you and kind of feed off of each other to make you who you are as a artist?
They all come together because they are the interests that I have, I feel like they don't feel disparate to me. They feel like all part of the whole, because I think what I'm really interested in is communicating. I really like ideas, and I like figuring out ways of having conversations, and those conversations come in different forms. They come in the form of drawing something and passing it along to someone. They come in the form of making a song and having people listen to the song and get the ideas from the song from that. And they come from being in a classroom, asking questions and having conversations. So I chose the things that speak to me the most, so I can end up in rooms having conversations. I can end up on the phone having a conversation with you, I think that's the ultimate medium, is the conversation. And I have to choose, what works best to get that conversation started, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And, over your life, you've been celebrated. You've won, a number of awards. And I don't want to know what your favorite one has been, but what award have you received that really genuinely surprised you? You just didn't see it coming.
There was an award, the Tim and Helen Coburn-Meyer Award, Artistic Achievement Award, was an award that other people nominate you for. It really took me by surprise. It was a huge award money-wise, and I got it in a time period where I was barely scraping by. So not only did other people choose me for the award, but it really changed my life in terms of like putting me afloat, you know, in a time period where that was the help I really needed. So, you know, winning that award actually brought tears to my eyes. So that was really great.
What's the best thing about waking up every day knowing that you get the chance to create music? What do you like the best about being a professional musician?
That's a good question. You know, I feel like the world I created for myself is like I wake up with a fresh sketch page in front of me, you know, that I get to draw on every day, regardless of whether that's music or teaching or visual work. I have the opportunity to make something every day, and that's a real privilege, and it's really exciting. I was able to like arrange my life in a way that, you know, creating stuff, you know, drawing and visual work is like the way that I sustain myself. Like, there's no way that I could imagine that would have been real as a child, you know?
So you've been around some heavy hitters throughout your time, some veterans and cats that have been around the jazz world for a long time. What have you learned from those, you know, older musicians, wiser or those that have been around for a long time that you in turn have taken and you teach your students?
The musicians and visual artists that I meet that I most admire really put the intention of the work first. They really are kind of focused on creating strong work, whether it has messages behind it or it's the tonalities or it's the rhythm or it's the, you know, conceptual, you know, ideas behind it, or it's the politics. You know, the artists that work with intention, like, seem to get more brilliant as they get older. And I really admire that, and that's something that I hold on to and try to, you know, explore in my own work.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of yourself. Who do you think you are?
I still think I'm that same kid that, you know, bought his first X-Men comic in 1978 and is still amazed with that comic, but also has that same amazement at, you know, in the world, you know. So yeah, I think back to that kid and I go, hey, we're doing pretty good. We're doing okay, you know. So I think that's he's my checkpoint, you know.
You know, as we do all kind of emerge to the stage a little bit more and we get back to it, and it's been a long time since March of 2020, what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music, both the musician and the audience?
That's a good question. I think as we emerge, I feel like we need to like reassess how we're putting on shows. I think shows in the park are a beautiful thing, you know. I think shows not always in bars is a beautiful thing. Like, I feel like we all need music, and we need music in a variety of different ways, you know. We need music on the radio for our home needs, you know. I love putting on the radio and like cleaning the house or making food, you know. We need music in our schools. We need music in our parks. We need music everywhere, you know. So I would like to reemerge from this reimagining where people can spend their time enjoying sound, you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. Yeah. And I think that's been kind of one of the things about this is that I think things move so fast and we have everything at our fingertips that sometimes we need to understand that nature really is control, and we aren't quite in as much control as we think we are, and we need to slow it down and recalibrate what's real, you know? And, so I 100% get it. And, man, Damon, thank you for taking some time out for the show and opening up about your world and music. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And this was a great interview. You did a great job.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Maryland. Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Maryland, Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Damon for his time, cool, and energy. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.